Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm gonna do a little live Facebook on part of our brain rehab basics course. So I chose the lobes of the brain because everybody has a brain, so it's good to learn about it. But I just wanted to share a couple of slides from our course with you. And for those that don't know, our brain rehab basics course, it started out talking about cellular health and how to support the cellular system. And then also, what fatigue looks like when you're working with patients that have suffered neurological diseases. And then from there, we went in and talked more about brainstem areas. And then we touched on lobes of the brain. And then we just finished up with balance basics. And soon enough, we'll go over peripheral nerve, what to look for on exam, and then some different types of modalities you can use for nerve injuries. And then we'll do a comprehensive basic neuro exam. So this is all part of a bigger course, but I just wanted to share it with you guys live. So it's a brief introduction. So we're going to touch on the four lobes. But first of all, when we talk about this type of brain rehab, something that's pretty important to remember, and this is a very general rule, but when you're doing some sort of brain exercise or brain rehab, you're affecting certain areas when you work on sides of the body. So for example, in this picture here, you can see that doing different types of modalities or stimulation to the right side of the body, you're going to send some really good information up to the same side cerebellum, and that's going to cross over to the opposite hemisphere. So stuff on the right side of the body, it will touch both sides of the brain, but most of the pathways that travel within our system are going to go over to the opposite brain. And same with the left side of the body. So any type of stimulation or therapy or modality that you use on the left side of the body will travel up to the left cerebellum, and then it'll travel over to the right brain as a general rule. Not every single pathway is the same, but that's just a good rule of thumb to think about and to know and to have in the back of your head when you're doing different types of brain exercises. Because let's say, for instance, you're working with a stroke patient and they had a stroke on the right side of their brain. Most of the time, depending on the area, you'll see the effect of that stroke on the left side of the body. So then doing modalities or therapies to the left side of the body, you'll be affecting the injured area of the right brain. And it just depends on what therapies you choose, what may be best for the patient, and then how much stimulation that patient can tolerate. Same thing goes for traumatic brain injury. Sometimes you'll see it a little bit more on one side of the brain than the other side. Sometimes you'll see it more in the front or in the back. It just all depends on where the injury occurred. So knowing this as a general rule can kind of just help guide your care plan if you're working with patients at home or if you're working with patients in the clinic. But let's touch on some of the lobes. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the function, what happens when these lobes aren't working good, and then just simple strategies that we can do to help kind of get stimulation to these areas. This is all very basic information, but the course, we really dive into a little bit more detailed information. So occipital lobe function, obviously it's there so we can see. It's a big receptor in the back of our brain that allows us to be able to visualize our environment. It's responsible for understanding shape perception, visual perception, and interpretation, as well as understanding objects and word through recognition, and other functions as well. Again, this is just some of the basic rules. So what happens when there's areas of the brain, specifically in the occipital lobe, that aren't working well? Well, you have defects in vision. You can have what are called visual field cuts. So you may have the inability to see on one side of the eyes than the other based on where the injury is. You can have difficulty identifying colors. That's called color agnosia. You can have visual illusions and hallucinations. You may see this in different types of conditions, but this may be changes in the way the occipital lobe is working. Difficulty with reading and writing. Difficulty recognizing drawn objects, and something called word blindness, where you can't really recognize what a word is. So the simplest, most easiest way to stimulate your occipital lobe is to get outside. And getting outside, I think, is one of the best things you can do for your brain, but getting in different types of environment, different visual inputs. So here you can see like this person's hanging out on a really, really pretty, what looks like some sort of river or lake area. here's the forest, just going for a nice nature walk. We know that research shows that nature, going out in nature and walking in nature can do so much good for the brain and for the body, but you also get really good visual input and visual stimulation to the occipital lobe of your brain. And the reason I say that is because there's different details, different colors, different 3D patterns that your brain's picking up when you're out there working, as opposed to sitting at a desk looking at a computer screen all day. So it sounds so simple and easy, but sometimes it's simple things that are the most effective. If you can't get outside, you can look at art, looking at objects, looking at shapes, colors, patterns, pictures. All that is great stimulation for occipital lobe. If you don't have an art book, you can scroll through art websites. Pick something that you like to look at and go through and look at them. There's so many great websites that you can just pull up and look at different beautiful landscapes, visual fields. If you like to look at art, you can hop on. I'm sure now with the COVID crisis, there's companies that are allowing you to get on and do virtual tours. Which is great. Actually, for our son, like the Atlanta Zoo has a virtual tour and other things. So you can do really cool stuff like that just to activate those occipital lobes. And then you can also do different types of light therapy, which is very stimulating, as you know, the occipital lobe is a big receptor for vision and light. So this is actually a great little product. Don't want to do too many product shout outs, but this is from a company called iLights. And this is a very inexpensive tool compared to other clinical modalities that you can use to activate the visual fields. And what the patient does is they just put them on, and there's different lights that flash in different patterns to affect different areas of the brain. So I just picked this picture because what you can see here is that you can set the lights so that they stimulate more so one side of the brain than the other. So these lights that are over in this left visual field are going to cross over to the right side of the brain and activate the primary visual cortex in the right hemisphere. And you can see visual information from the left visual field, which are these red arrows. They're going to cross over eventually. Some cross, some don't. And they're going to basically activate or stimulate the opposite hemisphere. And then visual information from the right visual field, they're going to come over, which are more in this blue color. They're going to cross over and activate the left hemisphere. So again, it's super simple. It's super basic. But if you're doing brain rehab in your clinic, or if you're at home working with a loved one or a patient, this is a simple tool that you can use, purchase, and you don't have to have that. You can figure out other ways to do it. But this is a nice little picture to show you that stuff that's in the left visual field will activate the right cortex. Stuff that's in the right visual field will activate the left cortex. And I posted a little diagram on environmental enrichment a few days ago. Environmental enrichment is really creating a stimulating environment for the brain, because as I've said before, the brain is a sensory sponge. So the more that we can provide sensory cues, visual stimulation for the brain, the more it can appreciate that, and then it can get bigger, better, and stronger. So for example, let's say you had a stroke patient and they had a left visual field defect due to a right hemispheric stroke. What you could do to create more of an enriched environment for that patient to try to activate that area of the brain is put things in their visual field that are in the left area. So for example, if they're sitting straight, instead of the TV being on their right side, it could be over in their left side, making that information kind of come in to try to travel across into the right brain. Again, simple, basic, but it's sometimes the little things that can help. So that's the occipital lobe. Moving on to temporal lobes. These have a temper. No, I'm just kidding. Some of the basic functions of the temporal lobes: interpreting sound. They play a significant role in memory, understanding written material and verbal material, and also facial recognition. So I told this in the course that we taught, but I was in the store one day. This person comes up to me like, "What's up?" And I was like, I was kind of taken aback because I hadn't seen them in forever. And it was a patient I saw like twice, and I couldn't remember who they were. And I was like, oh man, my temporal lobes need some stimulation. But being able to recognize who the person's face is a responsibility of the temporal lobe and some other areas of the brain as well. But when the temporal lobes start to shut down, what you may see is that they have difficulty recognizing faces. That's called prosopagnosia. They can have difficulty understanding spoken words. Wernicke's is an area that's responsible for receptive speech, so understanding what people are saying. and majority of the literature shows that that's on the left side of the brain as opposed to the right. They could also have disturbances with selective attention to what a person sees and hears. So selective attention could be an issue. What you may see in ADD, ADHD, or if your loved one's telling you to do chores at home when you want to do something else. Difficulty with identification of objects. Within the visual fields, you have a what and a where stream. So basically visual information comes in, and the what stream kind of travels down through the temporal lobes back to the occipital lobe, and the where stream is through the parietal lobe areas, which makes sense, and you'll see that in a second. Short-term memory loss and interference with long-term memory. So you can't really get long-term memory if you don't have short-term memory. So the short-term memory is really important. So the health of the temporal lobes is really important. Persistent talking, something I'm doing right now, just blah, 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 on and on. I'm at home right now. My wife and I are staggering our schedule to be with our 2-year-old, and I have to like make sure I have coffee because as soon as he wakes up in the morning, he's just nonstop, which is amazing and I love it. But at some point you're like, oh my gosh, are you ever going to stop talking? And I hope he doesn't. But that's persistent talking. More the research shows that's on the right side than the left, as we do have changes and differences in the hemispheres. And then increased aggressive behavior if the temporal lobes aren't working as well as they should be, which is not good for anybody. So easiest, simplest way to activate temporal lobes, slap on some headphones. That, again, general rule, but the temporal lobes are responsible for receiving auditory stimulation. So you can put on some music, you can put on different sounds, beats, frequencies into one ear or the other to try to activate one or both sides of the brain. So you can listen to and perform musical activities of the brain associated areas that are responsible for memory, reasoning, speech, motion, and reward. There's so many other ways to activate the temporal lobe, which we go over in our Brain Rehab Basics course, but that's the simplest way. And just to kind of show you the idea, again, the brain has specific pathways. So when you put music in the left ear, the majority of the fibers will eventually cross over to the right temporal lobes, but you do get some what's called ipsilateral activation of the same side hemisphere. So it's not just 100% all the way over there. You get both sides, but the majority go over and stimulate the opposite side of the cortex. And same for the right ear. Majority will cross over to the left temporal lobe area, but you will get some activation or stimulation to the same side as well. That's just the way that we're wired. Okay, the second to last, parietal lobes. So some basic parietal lobe function, spatial orientation. So knowing where your body is in space, understanding your environment around you, not bumping into walls. That's an important thing. Sensory input. So understand or having good sensory feedback. So knowing when something's hot versus cold, being able to perceive vibration, not having chronic pain syndromes. Those are all good functioning parietal lobes. Smooth eye movements. So in the course, we talk about how to activate the brain with specific eye movements. Smooth pursuits, which are slow movements in certain directions, will activate specific areas of the parietal lobe. It's responsible for helping read as well as receiving information about pain, so pain perception. So what happens when this area of the brain starts to not work as well as it should, or if there was injury? Difficulty distinguishing left from right. So not understanding if if someone says, hey, raise your right hand, raise your left hand, they're not able to comprehend that, or they get mixed up. Difficulty with math, dyscalculia. So I think I had that in high school. Just kidding. Difficulty focusing visual attention, lack of awareness of different body parts in space. So a little bit clumsy, kind of bumping into walls. If you know someone, or if you are someone that's constantly bumping into a wall and hitting your shoulder, we may need to have your parietal lobes checked. Difficulty with hand-eye coordination. This also is obviously very what's called cerebellar in nature. So your cerebellum plays a significant role in coordination, but parietal lobes as well. Difficulty with reading. So this is called alexia. And then difficulty attending to more than one object at a time. That's me. You're not great at multitasking. So like if someone walks in here right now from my staff, I would totally get confused and forget that we're doing a live stream. But the easiest way to stimulate the parietal lobes is to provide sensory stimulation to different areas of the body. So in this picture here, this is actually what's called the sensory homunculus. This is the homuncular man. And what you can see is we're providing sensory stimulation by him standing on a vibration platform. He's getting laser stimulation to one side of his face. And we're also doing some vibration to his left hand, which would send signals over to the right side of the body, right side of the brain. He's getting some vibration on his tongue, maybe a TENS unit on the shoulders, maybe some light brush on the other hand. Basically, this slide was just here to show you that you can incorporate different modalities to provide sensory information to help build areas of the brain. Because remember, our brain is a big sensory sponge. It wants stimulation. It wants good positive stimulation. And then just to show you a very general pathway. So if, let's say for instance, you have a little vibration tool and you put it in your right hand, vibration in the right hand is going to send signals into the spinal cord, and then it's going to eventually cross over in the brainstem to the opposite side sensory cortex. So right hand, left brain. And then the opposite is true. So vibrational input into the left hand will go over to the right brain via specific pathways. All right, wrapping it up with frontal lobes. Again, this is just a little intro to show you what we've been teaching through 2020. So frontal lobe, one of the most important, some of the most basic functional functions of the frontal lobe is reward versus pleasure, planning, motivation, being able to keep your attention, movement, so motor movement, and then judgment. So good judgment, good reasoning, acting like a normal human. These are all good frontal lobe functions. What happens when the frontal lobe becomes derailed? Well, you can have difficulty with sequencing tasks, and you'll see this, sadly in neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. Trying to make a cup of coffee becomes very difficult for people. Changes in personality. Typically with frontal lobe disorders, one thing is you'll see more of like a social isolation. So they have changes in social behavior. They're not very engaging. And of course, people could be more introverted than extroverted, but we're looking for changes. So if you take someone who loves to be with people, be outside, be engaged, and all of a sudden they lack that, they don't want to do that anymore, that's a concern for the health of their frontal lobe. Loss of spontaneity in interacting with others. So again, that kind of goes with the others that we said, but spontaneity and being able to appreciate spontaneity, I call it cortical flexibility, which you'll see here next. Being able to kind of like understand how other people think, not be 100% crazy rigid in your thought process. So having flexible frontal lobes is a sign of healthy frontal lobes. Changes in expressive language. So this is more of the front part of the Wernicke's issue, which we talked about earlier. Again, mostly found in the left hemisphere, but you can get what's called a Broca's aphasia, so difficulty with the motor aspect of speech. And then persistence of a single thought, so perseveration. And that's just basically where someone just can't turn off a negative thought or some sort of thought that they're having. They have no pause button to be able to say, hey, stop thinking about that. It's time to move on. That's called perseveration. And that's when the frontal lobe isn't working as well as it should. So the frontal lobe, it plays a role in so many things, but the most easiest general way to stimulate the frontal lobe is to move. So movement obviously is going to globally impact the brain and have hopefully a positive impact on the brain. But the motor centers are found in the front part of the brain, in the premotor cortex. So the other thing we could do is to kind of activate movement. We could also learn a new sport or get involved with a new activity. Learning some sort of new skill or game, having to think and to do things consciously is more of a frontal lobe exercise. And then another way to do it, which a lot of athletes do, is working on reaction time. So this is a company called Binovi. They're located in Canada, great company. And this is a great tool that they use to help increase reaction speed time and engage the frontal lobes. So you can find them online as well. But that's the most general, simplest way is to start moving. If you think about it, like how many of us are sitting all day? And sometimes too, if you start to move, you just feel better. So that's the biggest thing is I always recommend moving, getting the muscles moving because it really stimulates the brain. So one area of the brain, over the course, I talk about specific areas of the frontal lobe. So we kind of break it down into different gyri. So this in particular is a medial frontal gyrus, but you're really getting frontal lobe activation when you're doing this. This is a reaction sticker game. So if you don't have a fancy tool, well, you could do at home while your kids are at home too. All kids could use some frontal lobe activation, is you can put different color stickers on the wall. You can draw circles with a dry erase, whatever you have at home, and you can just shout out colors and make them go to different colors. So the speed and the efficiency of the movement is how you exercise that area. Again, this is so general. It's not very specific, but it's a way to start to engage the frontal lobes and get movement into the system. So I call it the reaction sticker game. You can make this more difficult by having them do a finger to nose movement, which is more of a cerebellar movement. You can have them stand on one leg. They could stand on a balance board. You could put music in there in one ear. There's so many ways to change it up. And again, that's what we talk about in our course. I posted this before too. This is a fun one, reaction card game. So grab a deck of cards and shuffle them. Tell the patient to raise their right hand when they see a black card and their left hand when they see a red card. So they can't see the cards coming, and as soon as you flip them, they have to raise their hand. That'll be a little bit right versus left as well, right? So parietal lobes. But you can make this game more difficult by adding in suits and numbers. So you could say, hey, I want you to raise your left, what do we say here? Black card, red card. So I want you to raise your left hand when you see a red card, but if there's a number, don't raise any hand at all. If it's a suit, you can raise your hand. Stuff like that, just to make it more difficult for the loved one or for the patient. So I just wanted to share this with everybody. I know I'm live, but I can't see any questions or comments, so I'll stop the live and then I'll jump off to type in some answers before we start back up. But I hope everyone's staying safe and doing well. And if you're interested in our courses, we have several condition-specific courses recorded, so you can always email us. But for the Brain Rehab Basics course, we started out with the cellular health, then we went to the cranial nerves, then we went to brainstem, and then we went over, we went to brainstem, cranial nerves, lobes of the brain, and then we covered balance basics. So there's 4 recorded courses. It's about 4 hours of content for each course. So if you're interested, check it out. If you have any questions, you can shoot us a message. I'm trying to get better about answering messages on social media. But I hope everyone's staying safe, and we'll talk to you guys soon. So have a great one, and we'll catch up later. Thanks for your time. Bye.